Right, well, brilliant. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to our global audience. We're really excited to have you all with us today. And welcome to our second in the series of 3 webinars that have been hosted by Scaled Agile and Ivor Jacobson. My name is Bev O'Connor and I'm the Territory Director responsible for the UK, Ireland and South Africa and all our customers and business partners therein. So it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this session. And we're looking at development value stream patterns and the observations that Brian has gleaned over the years of running value stream mapping and our identification workshops. So if you want to nip to the next slide, Brian.
Yes, if it starts behaving. Hang on, there we go.
Yay! Okay, so you can see that the session that will be recorded today and the previous session was also recorded, and you can still get access to these recordings via the IJI website. So it will be available after the webinar is completed today, so you will be able to go back and have a look at what happened in the session. We really want it to be interactive today, so like the last session, if you could, if when Brian's going through his pitch, if you could put some questions in the Q&A session, the Zoom Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Don't put them in the chat, put them in the Zoom Q&A session, and then we can pull those together and have a little question and answer session at the end. And please keep saying hello in the chat. We love to know who's joined us today. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists today. So we've got Odile Moreau. Odile's a strategic advisor and an SPCT for Scaled Agile, and she supports us in our EMEA region. So as the name suggests, she was born and raised in France, but she's worked abroad for many years. She speaks multiple languages. It's not unheard of for Odile to do an event in the morning in one language and then a different one in the afternoon in another. She puts us all to shame. She's got 20 plus years supporting numerous organizations across differing disciplines in business management, software management. But over the last 10 years, Odile has really been supporting and inspiring leaders and teams in adopting Agile at scale. And she, with a passion and enthusiasm not seen really in this industry, which is very uplifting and why she's a favorite amongst our customers. And Odile's job today is to take all your questions that you're going to put in the Zoom chat at the bottom of the screen, and then she will collate them and she will facilitate a session with Brian at the end of the session today.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Odile. So that just leaves me to introduce our main man of the day, Brian Tucker. Brian's a principal consultant to Ivor Jacobson. Ivor Jacobson is one of our most prestigious business partners for Scaled Agile. Brian is a SAFE fellow and an SPCT and was in fact one of the first trainers outside of Scaled Agile to qualify as an SPCT. So Brian also has the auspicious accolade of having delivered the program consultant training more than anyone else globally. So you really are in special hands today. But alongside his training engagements, Brian has been involved in SAFE implementations across multiple industries and numerous companies, and he's run numerous workshops, and he's going to share some of his experiences with us today. So I'm going to hand over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you. So I've been asked by Scaled Agile to cover the topic of organising around value, and that is a mighty big topic to cover, impossible to do it justice in just a short soundbite. So it became a series of 3 webinars. In the first webinar 2 weeks ago, we looked at aligning around value and the challenges that presents. The recording is available from the links to the IJI website dropped into chat earlier. In this webinar, we're going to get practical by exploring the value stream and art identification workshop and looking at development value stream patterns. Finally, on February 28th, in 2 weeks' time, we'll tackle funding and reporting, the flow of money and understanding whether it's been wisely spent. We'll drop sign-up links into the chat later. Now, I'm reckoning on just under 40 minutes of me talking, which should leave about 15-20 minutes for questions at the end. As always, I will caveat this presentation with it's my interpretation. You might interpret things differently. You are quite at liberty to do so. Unfortunately, like so many things in this world, there is no right answer. So if you want to take a different path, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. All I would do is ask, do the metrics show that it's better than what's gone before? Follow the data. So the value stream identification and agile release train mapping workshop, an absolute mouthful to say. It is also the practical process used to try to rearrange your organization around value. And buried at the heart of that is the simple statement, group the people into development value streams. Job done. Easy. But how? What logic drives these decisions? It really is a bit of a black art, and there's not much written down. There's not a lot of advice on how to group the people who should be working together. Now, whilst each scenario is inevitably going to be unique, there are similarities, and given enough data, common patterns should emerge. One of the benefits of having run the Implementing SAFe course over 120 times is that I've done a lot of value stream and art identification workshops. That's embedded within the training. Given we usually run 3 to 4 analyses in parallel during the trainings, since the workshop was introduced to the training in 2016, I've probably analysed a few hundred value streams. Because the training is open enrollment, we get scenarios from across the whole spectrum of industries, rather than just being constrained to a single company or industry. Now, yes, I will fully admit that it is quick and dirty in a training course because of the time constraints. The numbers might not be perfect, but it still generates enough data to stimulate sensible discussions and to allow us to see the patterns that emerge when doing this repeatedly. And it's those patterns that we're going to explore in today's webinar. Before we get to the logic behind development value streams, let's take a quick look at the steps leading up to that to check that we're gathering the right information. Map out the operational value streams, the set of steps to get from trigger to value. What makes it a value stream? Well, it's a repeatable set of steps, the same each and every time. If you've got a business process already mapped, I'd use that as a starting point. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. You probably don't need the level of detail contained within the business process for this exercise. When the steps are being mapped out, the question I'm always asking is, will this extra step result in finding another system? If the answer is yes, we add the step. If the answer is no, it's more detail than we need, so we just combine it with an existing step. It's also worth pausing for a moment and commenting on those grey figures at the top. They are the internal staff that keep the operational value stream running. In the loans example used in the toolkit, and that you can also see in front of you here, that could be branch staff or call center staff interacting with a customer. It could be back office staff in the bank, keeping the wheels of commerce turning. They are potential customers for our development value stream. Remember, from a lean perspective, the customer is just the recipient of our work. They're internal customers. The nice thing is that hopefully we can talk to internal customers directly to find out what they want, what they really, really want, rather than relying on people adopting developed personas and trying to answer on the customer's behalf. A brief little detour to pose the question, what's the product? A few years back, I was working with a satellite navigation manufacturer, and at the time, their primary operational value stream was selling in-car devices to individual consumers. And they produced a device every 6 months to target the market rhythms of the summer holidays and the Christmas period. Is each new device a product in a SAFe sense? Is each new device its own operational value stream? No, or at least I don't think so. There is no stability with those devices. They are there for a season, then gone. Arranging around them makes no sense. I would assert that the code base, the mapping data and associated mechanical and electrical designs are the product that the development value stream owns. And every 6 months there are epics to create a new offering based upon that historic code base, alongside epics to improve that code base, to keep up with or get ahead of the market. Detour over. The next step is to identify the systems that support the operational value stream. Whilst these are being identified, I also like to gather some attributes of these systems, since those attributes are going to inform our decision logic about the development value streams later in the process. What I'm interested in is knowing if any of these systems are tightly coupled. Can't release A without releasing B at the same time. Perfect lockstep. It might make sense to keep these two systems within the same development value stream so that release coordination is easier. Long term, tight coupling is bad. You'll want to re-architect. But this might be a compromise we make to get going so that we can use the lean agile processes to help with the re-architecting into the desired future state. External. The system is external to our organization. We have limited or no control over its development. An example from this, from the loan scenario used in the training and toolkit, might be credit scoring. It's not uncommon for this service to be provided by an external supplier. Experian and Equifax are UK examples of companies that provide credit scoring checks. These external systems are part of the operational value stream, so they can't be ignored. There will be a handful of people somewhere maintaining the contract and relationship and making sure the system is accessible from within our organization. Those people are going to need to be part of a development value stream somewhere at some point, and they'll need that funding. Shared. The system identified doesn't just support one operational value stream, but lots of other operational value streams as well. From the loans scenario, the example would be core banking. Do you think it's unique to the loans operational value stream? The clue is in its name, core. It supports loans, but also credit cards, current accounts, corporate banking, and probably more. It's going to have a different set of stakeholders, business owners, from the systems that are unique to the loans operational value stream. And it's those differences in stakeholders that will inform our decision logic about development value streams later. Find everyone that's involved in improving those systems and keeping them running. Get the raw numbers, but don't worry about the size at the moment. Ignore existing organizational structures. This exercise is all about who should be grouped to keep things working. Defer the compromises caused by corporate politics until later. Don't double count. If people support multiple systems, show them supporting multiple systems. We should take another quick little detour here to talk about suppliers. If the supplier is providing people as staff augmentation, their people are embedded in your trains and teams, and you treat them as if they were your employees, then they're part of these numbers. Beyond that, you need to look at your supplier relationship. If you have direct control over what the supplier is doing, then I'd be inclined to include them here. The example would be a supplier that is building a bespoke system just for you. Maybe you can even persuade them to run as a release train in line with your cadence. If you don't have control over what the supplier is doing, all you can do is put in a request for a change and hope that that aligns with the supplier's strategy. And examples here would be things like CRM systems like Salesforce or an operating system like Windows. You can configure them, but you can't change them directly. These are truly external, and the only people that I would list here for this exercise are the people maintaining the contract and relationship and any engineering staff involved in making the system visible and present within the organization. Supplier detour over. Raw data gathered. Now we can look at some of the decision logic to group the people into development value streams. Simple. Not really. This is where the black magic happens. So what is the logic that's running through my head when I'm trying to form development value streams? The only official advice given is minimize collaborations and dependencies, but we can elaborate on that a little bit more. Tightly coupled systems probably want to be in the same development value stream. If they're together, it will be easier to coordinate than if they were in separate development value streams, which neatly aligns with minimize handoffs and dependencies. Can the development value stream own value delivery end to end across the whole of an operational value stream? So end to end value from a business perspective. If all the systems involved in end-to-end value are within a single development value stream, then this will minimize handoffs and dependencies. If it is necessary to break end-to-end delivery across separate development value streams, then look for loose coupling, where the development value streams can release independently of each other. Systems with similar stakeholders and funding sources might want to be in the same development value stream. Conversely, systems with dissimilar stakeholders might want to be in separate development value streams. This is where the information about whether the systems are shared across operational value streams becomes useful. The stakeholders to a shared system will include representatives from all the operational value streams that this shared system supports. And the example from the training toolkit is core banking. Local systems, loan origination in the training and toolkit example, will just have stakeholders from a single operational value stream. Having systems with different sets of stakeholders within a development value stream can prove challenging. The stakeholders, imagine if core banking was part of the loans development value stream, then the stakeholders for current accounts and credit cards would all be trying to get core banking features prioritized in amongst the loans functionality. And there could be a chance for conflict within that set of stakeholders to occur, which we'd rather not have. Development value streams need to be large enough to be empowered to self-organize. Now, the first rule of scaling is don't scale. But the first rule of portfolio, and development value streams are a portfolio construct because they're funding units. The first rule of portfolio is you need to have sufficient scale to self-organize. The larger the development value stream, the more ability you have to reorganize within the development value stream to service the current needs of the systems the development value stream is responsible for. There is a U-curve style optimization at work here. Too big, it's going to be unmanageable, but too small, and you're going to have to keep reallocating budgets rather than letting the people self-organize for themselves. So the question becomes, does the development value stream make a sensible funding unit? Remember that within a safe portfolio, it's the development value streams that get funded. So those are the primary factors that I'm considering, but there might well be others. Every situation is unique, and you might find something else extra that needs consideration. There will be no right answer. Compromises will need to be made to find acceptable groupings. So what are some of the patterns that start to emerge? Well, within the training material, Scaled Agile provides a number of examples. The working example is loans from a finance company. There is also vehicle manufacturing and software sales. They're nice examples, but actually all of these could be collapsed into a generic sales scenario. Each example does use different words, but there ends up being a step to engage the customer to make that sale, provide the product, and then take the payment. The systems supporting that are customer relationship management, the product, and payment. Different organizations may have different names for these systems. They may be a collection of subsystems rather than a single entity. It doesn't matter. Remember, for the purposes of patterns, we want to aggregate, abstract up out of the tiny details. The pattern that we've regularly seen emerge is that CRM and payment are often linked. Not necessarily a tight coupling, but information flows between them. The development value stream is a U-shaped line encompassing the top and tail of the operational value stream. When drawn, it looks a little bit odd. The U-shape isn't what you'd naturally find in a neat ordered pipeline, but it's arising because those systems are related and their stakeholder sets are often similar. Sat in the middle is the product, the thing of value that we produce, that our customers desire. So one of our first patterns, top and tail, value in the middle. It's that product in the middle that can be challenging. This whole process, the development value stream and art identification workshop, works best when there is a set of systems to support a process through which the product or service is offered, rather than selling the product directly. The loans example from the training material that we've been using to illustrate the data gathering, there are a number of systems supporting the issuing of a loan to an end customer. The systems, the output of the development value streams, are not the product. The immediate customer for the systems are the internal staff, the grey shadows above the operational value stream. They're the branch staff, call center operatives, underwriters making eligibility decisions, which means lots of systems to group engineering staff around, lots of opportunities. So minimize those dependencies, keep tight couplings together, common sets of stakeholders, and don't let the development value streams get so small that self-organization becomes challenging. However, when we sell the product directly, it's not uncommon to end up with a monolith. Typically, the product cannot be subdivided. It's all or nothing. If you want to build a vehicle, you need the design specifications for all of the parts of that vehicle that are going to be assembled. Having just half of them means an incomplete production line, and the value is only achieved once the vehicle rolls off the end of the production line. Actually, arguably, the value is only achieved once the customer's paid, but regardless, a half-assembled vehicle without insight into how to finish it, that's certainly not valuable. This monolith can be quite large. I don't have the precise figures for exactly how many people are involved in designing and engineering a vehicle, but having worked with a few vehicle manufacturers in my time, I do know that there will be several thousand people involved in the design. The challenge becomes breaking the monolith apart, and there are a couple of things we can try. The first is to rephrase the question. I was running and implementing SAFe training in Stockholm, and some of the attendees were from a games company that produces a game engine utilized by a number of video game development studios that actually produce the video games. The game engine provides common technology for getting graphics displayed on the screen, sounds coming out the loudspeakers, so that rather than each game studio having to reinvent the wheel on the underlying common parts, they can instead focus on storyline and gameplay, the things that differentiate their game from the next. We ran the value stream exercise using the game studios as the customer, and it became the sales value stream we've already seen. A handful of people dealing with CRM and payments, and several hundred people producing the product in the middle. We started discussing how we could break the monolith up, and the conversation pivoted to, what if we change the customer? Instead of treating the game studio as the customer, what if we looked at the staff within the game studio? Graphical artists needing to get three-dimensional models and textures into the engine, sound designers trying to add sound effects and music. When they became the customers and their needs became the trigger, then we had much more productive conversations. No longer was it the monolith that was the game engine, but modules within the game engine that the customer's operational value streams impacted. Sometimes rephrasing the question, going for a slightly different customer, might yield you more insight. Might. It won't always. If we go back to our vehicle example, we could look at different personas of end customer, commuter drivers, traveling salesmen, mums and dads on the school run. They're all going to be utilizing the car in roughly the same way. No help whatsoever for decomposing the monolith. I deliberately didn't jump straight to architecture. We ought to try and pursue more customer-centric means before resorting to techno-centric means of trying to split the monolith. If we've exhausted all other possibilities, then maybe look at architecture. Are there any subsystems, components, pieces of the monolith that are loosely coupled to the rest of the system that can be split apart and run separately from the rest with minimal collaborations or dependencies? Let's go back to the vehicle example. The power plant can typically be updated separately from steering and suspension, which is independent of interior fittings, which is independent of autonomous driving functionality. If everyone sticks to the agreed space that they are allowed to occupy and the interfaces, which would be bolt holes in the case of the mechanical design, then they can make changes as much as they like. Anything that would change the agreed space or interface would become a collaboration between the affected parties to reach sensible agreement. Often, architectural units are coupled with domain expertise. In my distant past, I used to be part of a 1,000-strong team that built an operating system for mobile phones. I looked after a team that dealt with the networking stacks. But that expertise in networking isn't immediately transferable to other parts of the operating system. You couldn't drop a networking engineer into one of the teams specializing in the graphics subsystem and expect them to operate at the same level as they were when they're in their own domain. So kernel primitives, file systems and storage, camera, microphone and audio processing, the snake game, they're all domain areas where it takes significant time and knowledge and expertise. What we need to be wary of is Conway's law and the inverse of Conway's law. Now, I can never ever remember which way round they are, but since we're talking about both, it really won't matter. One is that architecture follows organizational patterns. The inverse is that organizations are constructed around the architecture. We want to avoid both. We're trying to put organizational structures and architecture in place that supports the goal of lean, value in the sustainably shortest lead time. The dual operating system, the network and the hierarchy, and the ability to change the network rapidly means that your organizational structures are likely to be ahead of any significant architectural change you want to make. Therefore, you ought to consider not just the current architecture, but your desired future architecture as part of the value stream discussions. Otherwise, you'll be constraining yourself with organizational structures tied to the old architecture. and do make sure that the future architecture is aligned with and supporting value delivery in a lean, agile fashion. I suppose one of the most extreme of these architectural initiatives is a system replacement. It's not economically viable to continue with the old system. A new replacement system is necessary. Although internally, we might be taking all of the engineering, ripping it out and starting again in a brave new world, from the perspective of the customer, they don't care. Could be old tech, could be new tech, they just want it to work. Now that tells me that if we are doing a system replacement, perhaps both the old and new should be owned by the same development value stream. Consider the old world. A project would have been set up to instigate the new replacement system, and that project would spend all of its money on the shiny new system and wouldn't waste any of its money on turning the old system off, because that's the old thing. Which means there is now a new system running and an old system still running, and it costs money to keep both of them running. It's not uncommon for organizations to have significant numbers of old systems running that nobody remembered to turn off. And these become a vampiric drain on the organization, sucking away all the funds just to keep them running. If a development value stream owns both the old and new systems, then the development value stream can become responsible for coordinating the changeover from old to new. Unlike the project, the development value stream feels the cost of keeping the old system running and is more likely to turn it off in order to ease that pain. Because we fund the development value stream and then empower the development value stream to self-organize as the old system is turned off, the personnel involved can transfer over to supporting and improving the new system. No need for new budgets. It's just that the individuals concerned are now drawing from the new backlog rather than the old backlog. They're more likely to turn the old system off if they know that there is career continuation after the old system has been shut down. Shared services sometimes become their own development value streams. This is because of different sets of stakeholders. We'll use the loans example from the training and toolkit. The product management within the loans development value stream only has to deal with the loans operational value stream as its stakeholder, its business owner. The core banking development value stream has loans, credit cards, current accounts, and more as stakeholders. The loans development value stream just needs to do the most valuable thing for loans, whereas the core banking development value stream has to determine what's most valuable from all of the requests coming in from loans, credit cards, current accounts, and more. The prioritization challenges are different, and mixing them together would make it even more complex and is likely to result in conflict among the sets of stakeholders, because by their very nature, the needs of the local and shared systems are different. Here comes the compromise, however. If shared services become separate development value streams, then to get end-to-end value delivered, there will potentially be collaborations between the development value streams. How frequent are those collaborations? If they're occasional, then maybe you just manage it. But if the requests from the business always require the development value streams to collaborate, maybe it will be better to split the shared service development value stream up and move some of the people into the other local development value streams. Now we can get value delivered end to end without extra collaborations. But we will need to instigate something to look after the long-term technical strategy for the shared service to keep an eye on its technical health. Usually, An explicit community of practice around the shared service is given that mandate. And as they see technical issues, they create enabler features that can then be dropped onto one of the other development value streams for delivery. And the members of that community can champion those enabler features when they're back in their development value streams. So the compromise is, if you go full end-to-end delivery, in the other dimension, you're going to need something to look after the components or services technical health. If you arrange around the components or services, then the technical health is covered, but it's going to require a lot more effort to manage the collaborations to get end-to-end value delivered across the components or services. What if everything is shared? It's a scenario I've seen in some insurance companies. The systems support all of their operational value streams. Policy issuing is utilized by motor, household, and other insurance lines. Well, the previous discussion still holds. We could align the development value streams around the systems at the expense of more collaborations to get value delivered end to end. We could align more closely with the operational value streams by having representatives of each system in the development value stream. But that comes at the expense of needing explicit communities of practice to look after the technical health. There is no right answer here, which is the least wrong option, is sort of where you need to be. So we've explored the monolith. That's one extreme. The other extreme is microservices. Every piece of architecture is its own little thing that can release independent of all the other units. Each of these could be considered a development value stream in its own right. It doesn't even have to be microservices. Often as we get towards the end of transitioning an organization to lean agile ways of working, you reach the independent systems that have just a single team looking after them. Valuable in their own right, but no collaborations and dependencies with other teams. The training material suggests that you should group these small development value streams together as an agile release train. But that only works if there is some commonality between the development value streams, such that the teams within the agile release train can move between the development value streams. If the teams can't move between the development value streams that the agile release train owns, then if the teams can move between the development value streams that the agile release train owns, then the agile release train can manage the load balancing. Just imagine that one of the development value streams had a sudden rush of requests. If the teams can move between the development value streams, then they can all contribute to getting these important requests done. By swarming on the work, they'll get it done quicker. This is the embodiment of the little bit of logic that was need to be large enough to be empowered to self-organize. If only one team can work on the functionality and there is a sudden rush of requests around that functionality, then it will take the team as long as it takes to get through the work, which is likely to be considerably slower than if the teams could swarm around it. And that becomes a delay to the realization of value because the teams can't self-organize to meet demands. Sometimes there are a set of small independent development value streams left over that don't have anything in common. The teams looking after them can't easily transfer to another development value stream and support it because of the domain knowledge involved. What you shouldn't do is group these teams into a train, because the worst place to be putting together a plan is in a big noisy room full of people you don't interact with. And one development value stream's business owners generally aren't interested in the other development value streams, so PI planning starts to fall apart. It may be slightly heretical, but not everything has to be a train. However, if you're the portfolio, You don't want to be issuing pocket change funding to individual teams. You want to fund large, sensible lumps. Fund the group of teams, but let them plan independently. Each individual team should still be creating a PI plan, but they don't need to do it through a big room planning event. They can create it themselves. They should still be falling in line with the cadence of the rest of the organization and be planning at roughly the same time as the real agile release trains, so that collaborations can be negotiated if necessary. They should create objectives so they can communicate what they're trying to achieve within the PI. And at the end of the PI, the loop can be closed on whether they've achieved them, and therefore how predictable they are. The interface up to the portfolio looks like a train to provide a sensible funding unit. Internally, the teams act not as a train, but completely independent teams. I was working with a major UK household insurance company. They'd got 2 trains running to cover issuing of policies and handling claims on those policies respectively. There were also a couple of independent teams for data analytics and other small internal functions, not big enough to warrant being a train in their own right. And there was one last group of people. They dealt with brokerage, buying and selling of insurance policies through brokers. This group was about 8 managers and 5 engineers. Yet they consumed the budget equivalent to one of the agile release trains that were about 100 people in size. Rather than developing things themselves, they were buying in external systems and services, which their small team of engineers then glued together into a functional whole. It was a development value stream. There was a clear trigger, process, and value realization for both customer and organization at the end. Internally, though, it was not a typical agile release train. In the end, we set up a team of managers that manages the contracts and relationships with suppliers, and the engineers were already acting as a team. The teams were kept aligned by having a product owner and scrum master common across both teams. The teams fell in line with the organization's PI and iteration cadence and did a cut down version of PI planning to generate their objectives, the PI. A development value stream contains all the people, resources, tooling, infrastructure, contracts, and materials to allow it to function. In this case, the money spent on infrastructure and contracts far outweighed the money spent on people, but it is still a development value stream and acts like one. How do you know whether the proposed development value stream and train setup makes sense? Look to the pipeline of work. Look for epics that are specific to this development value stream. And if the work neatly falls on to the individual parts of the proposed structure, then it's a good structure. But if the work keeps cutting across your proposed structure, then maybe it's not such a good structure. Maybe you should pivot the organization to align with the flow as value, as we sort of discussed earlier with shared services. Now, to act as a validation of the work, the epics must be business needs. If you've pre-sliced them to fit organizational structures or architecture, then you render the test invalid. Always, always business needs. So there we are. I hope over the last 30 or so minutes, I've given you some insight into the decisions lurking within the value stream mapping and art identification workshop, from making sure that you've gathered the right data to some of the logic that steers how to group the people into value streams, and then the development value stream patterns that we've seen that stem from the workshop. One last thing. And it stems from one of my very first consultancy engagements. I was down in Munich working with Drew Gemilo, one of the founders of Scaled Agile, and we had a development value stream of 150 people. too big for the 50 to 125 sweet spot of an agile release train. And after 2 days of discussions, do we cut it this way? Do we cut it that way? We still didn't have an answer. Drew placed an overnight call to Dean, and the response came back was, run it as a big train. PI planning is going to be painful, but manageable, and you'll gather data and make an informed decision next time. So we kept it as a single train. PI planning was painful. Plan reviews took in excess of 2 hours, to the point where people were starting to lose focus. But we did learn. From things like the program board, we started to learn which teams needed to work with which other teams, and we could start to see the cut of least resistance through the group. They did one more PI planning to validate their hypotheses before splitting for the third PI planning event. The moral? Do something, anything. Gather data and start making decisions based on insight rather than supposition. You can always adjust at the PI boundaries. We crave stability. It helps with building trust, getting honest metrics, performing systemic improvement. But we welcome change. And for the first few PIs, change is likely to happen as you iteratively home in on the best organizational structural solution. So having aligned around value, we need to ensure that those development value streams are doing the right thing. Our next topic in 2 weeks' time is funding and reporting, the flow of money and understanding whether it's been wisely spent. We'll drop registration links into chat shortly. Thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting. As always, feedback gratefully appreciated so we can make things better the next time. And we should have time for questions. So I'll hand over to Adil to facilitate that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And we do have a lot of questions. And there is already a question about next time. So I will not handle this one, but we will be gathering more insight on this one. But there are 2 types of questions. The first one that are more technical, I would say, regarding, for instance, team topologies and Conway's law and reverse Conway's law. So a lot of those questions is, hey, have you been applying, for instance, the insight in the team topologies book when you are performing the development value stream identification workshop? And how can you leverage the typologies of those teams to make sure that you can have the delivery of value?
Well, the advantage of the team topologies, it gives us a lovely vocabulary and common vocabulary, because everyone's got the book and can look at it and then discuss. Yes, we do. Now, we're always looking for stream aligned. Prior to team topologies, I always used to call them feature-orientated teams or trains, because they could own features end-to-end, and owning feature end-to-end is the development value stream, hence stream aligned. We would always look to try and set those up wherever we can. And certainly with a release train, you've always got that possibility. Within 100 people, that is an agile release train, you should be able to try and find all of the skills and get them within that set. We then end up with component teams in old parlance, which is, well, in team topologies, I'd refer to these as the platform teams, because they're the ones that can release independently of everything else. And you want, particularly at the train level, to strive for that. If you've got complex subsystems locked together, then it's going to require a lot more collaboration. That pattern tends to occur more because of domain knowledge. If you're building really big things, it's not the architecture that's the complex, the issue. It's the fact that software engineers can't do mechanical engineering, and mechanical engineers can't do electrical engineering, and you don't want to let the electrical engineers start trying to write code. It just doesn't work like that. So that's when you end up with the complex subsystems, although it's actually because of the skills of the teams. No, I mean, yeah, arguably you could still form a stream aligned with a little bit of each of those skills and still get things done end to end. But you've got that language now, and that is there from team topologies, and that everyone can latch onto and then utilize that insight. It makes the conversations easier because we all have that common understanding. But you're still going to have to argue each one on its own merit. Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? Where should we group? I'd always strive towards stream aligned. Platforms are next. Try to avoid getting into complex subsystems if you can, because they're going to need a lot more help to collaborate together, which is where the enterprise solution delivery competency kicks in. I did get all of those words out in roughly the right order, thankfully.
Yeah,
good.
That's a feat in itself. Regarding your last point, there was also a question about limits. Obviously, you are scaling up, so you can start relatively small, and the bigger you got, you will probably be confronted with large solution trains. Have you seen in your experience some limits on how many trains can be fitted into a large to a solution train? I also have problems with my words today.
I haven't seen any limits yet, but then the most I've ever got up to is 12 to 14. It comes out 12 to 14 because the trains were evolving over time, so they were, the number that were there sort of evolved, which is fairly large. That was about 1,000 people, just under 1,000 people. Now those were all set up to be stream-aligned trains. They could cut all the way through what was one monolithic software stack. And it was monolithic because it all went down onto a single silicon chip, and you can't sell half a silicon chip. So it was all there. That works. If you get into, again, if we're into subsystems and you start getting cross end-to-end value requiring cross development value stream collaborations, it becomes a lot harder. You want to try and ensure that most things are independent. And if I use my operating system example, back from over a decade ago now, then usually graphics changes were separate from work on the networking stack. Those teams that were assembled into trains to look after graphics, kernel primitives, networking, they could basically just get on with it. There were, however, a couple of cross-cutting initiatives that involved absolutely everyone, and they took a lot more coordination. The initiative to go multi-core, that one hit absolutely everyone, and it took a long time and a lot of effort to keep everyone in sync, so that everyone was working on it in parallel. Because what you don't want to be doing as you go to multiple teams or multiple trains is this team does something and then the hands over to the next one, and then the next one and the next one. That swarming mentality, everyone working on it in parallel together, will get stuff done quicker than the relay race.
Exactly. Yeah.
Work being done in parallel, bad. We know that from playing the games in the principles. People working on a piece of work in parallel, good. Get it done quicker.
Exactly. I've got also we do have time. Questions regarding the people. You mentioned that we need to find out all the people together. We don't need to be very precise, but could you tell us a little bit more about, hey, can we have people from the operational value streams because they have knowledge that can be also used and leveraged by the development value stream? And same question with IT operations people that deal with basically the ITIL processes of change management.
Yeah, oh, indeed.
And so forth.
And yeah, then you should. And indeed, in the workshop itself, it wasn't a level of detail I particularly got onto because we were looking at the patterns. There is the step in the workshop that asks, should anyone else be joining the development value stream. And that's anyone that you need to ensure that value can be delivered in the sustainably shortest lead time. So might you need somebody from legal, marketing, all sorts of other parts of the business. Now, this is talking about explicitly embedding them in the development value stream. So they are there full-time on the development value stream, and drawing from the backlogs like anyone else on the development value stream. Sometimes that's not possible, and we just have to put requests out to the original departments and get work back. That's going to slow us down. That's the compromise we have to make if we don't have some of these resources. The other thing to think about is, do you need to embed them full time, or do you just need their knowledge? And in that case, all you might need to do is secure permission from the people running the operational value stream that you get these people's time, because they're subject matter experts or domain experts in the actual operational value stream itself. Might not need to be embedding them in the development value streams, but we do need to draw upon their knowledge. And that is, I say that quite glibly and quickly, but actually, that's hard, because these people are often already busy keeping the operational value stream running. And so to ask for their time is difficult. But if we don't have it, we're then in danger of going off and building the wrong thing. And that can never be right. So it's getting those feedback loops set up and persuading people that we need their input, particularly backlog development, vision, backlog development. That's the primary inputs there that then feeds into PI planning.
Great.
But that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, exactly. Last question, because this one is also come up quite a few.
Okay.
And then we've got maybe 30 seconds. How often would you recommend revisiting the value stream identification once you are getting started?
A full-blown workshop, I probably wouldn't do for another year. I mean, just revisiting what you've learned from the last PI and making some adjustments locally, you're doing that every PI. But then you've got completely reassessing, are we still structured right? Once a year, probably. The other thing is look for other triggers. If you've got new operational value streams emerging, that's a trigger. We may need to go back and revise. Budget changes. On the back end of participatory budgeting and all the money moving around, that might be another trigger that we might need to go back and reassess. So there's lots of things that can be happening out there that trigger this into motion, rather than it being a ceremonial thing that happens religiously every annual cycle or anything like that. It can be more reactive.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. That's all we've got, unfortunately, as time. So thank you all for all your questions that we have gathered, and looking forward to the next session about funding and all the money stuff.
Yeah. See you all in 2 weeks' time.
See you on the 28th of February. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Or a great morning, and see you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.